Next is the manufacturing overhead budget. So with this budget, we're not only going to find the estimated or budget amount of total manufacturing overhead for each month in the quarter, but we're also going to figure out how much of that budgeted overhead for each month and the quarter are we estimating to pay in cash. So what's the cash disbursement required each month and for the quarter for that total amount of estimated manufacturing overhead. So here it says that at Royal, manufacturing overhead is applied to units of product on the basis of direct labor hours. The variable manufacturing overhead rate is $20 per hour. The fixed manufacturing overhead is $50,000 per month, which includes $20,000 of non-cash costs, primarily depreciation of plant assets. So remember, something like depreciation is not something you write a check for. Remember, it's a kind of cost we incur, but it's not something we pay, right? It's a systematic allocation of costs. So $20,000 of that $50,000 we're not paying in cash. So that will be factored in the cash disbursement. So where did I get the budgeted direct labor hours for each month and for the quarter? Well, that simply came from our direct labor budget that we just completed. So in the direct labor budget, we found out the total amount of labor hours, direct labor hours required each month for the quarter. So I simply took those and we copied them over here. Now let's start with with April. We'll start with April. So in April, I estimate that I will need 1,300 direct labor hours. Well, if the variable manufacturing overhead rate is $20 per direct labor hour, we can simply take the total amount of budgeted direct labor hours times the variable overhead rate of $20 per direct labor hour to determine that the total variable manufacturing overhead that we estimate we will incur in April is $26,000. The fixed amount of manufacturing overhead, however, each month is $50,000. So we can put $50,000 there for the fixed overhead. So if the total variable overhead we estimate is $26,000 and the fixed overhead is $50,000, we'll simply add those two together to determine what the total estimated overhead is for the entire month. So for the entire month, we estimate we are going to incur about $76,000 of manufacturing overhead. But remember, that doesn't mean we're going to pay $76,000 in cash for that overhead. Remember, $20,000 of the $50,000 represents depreciation, which is a non-cash cost, a non-cash expense. So we need to take out $20,000 of that $76,000 because $20,000 of it is not going to be paid in cash. So only $56,000 of the $76,000 is the amount of cash disbursement required for April, specifically related to manufacturing overhead. And we're going to do the same thing for May. In May, we will need 2,300 direct labor hours, and the variable overhead rate is $20 per direct labor hour. So we anticipate we will spend about $46,000 on variable overhead because the estimate is that we'd be spending about $20 or incurring $20 of costs for each direct labor hour used. So the total variable overhead we estimate for May is $46,000 plus the $50,000 of fixed overhead. Remember, manufacturing overhead is made up of fixed and variable elements. So the total manufacturing overhead we estimate we will incur for the entire month of May is the variable and fixed portion added together, which is $96,000. Now, we're not going to pay all of that in cash. Remember, $20,000 of that $96,000 represents depreciation, non-cash costs, so only $76,000 would be required as a cash disbursement to pay for manufacturing overhead in the month of May. And we'll do the same for June here. In June, the budgeted direct labor hours is $1,450, and the variable manufacturing overhead rate is $20 per direct labor hour. So the total variable overhead we estimate we will incur in June is $29,000. We know the fixed overhead is $50,000 per month. So the total manufacturing overhead we anticipate we will incur for the month of June here is $79,000. Remember, $20,000 of that is a non-cash cost or includes non-cash costs like depreciation. So only $59,000 would be required as a cash disbursement to cover the manufacturing overhead for the month of June. And we can do now the sum for everything to look at the quarter. So the quarter's budgeted direct labor hours is 5,050 times the $20 of variable overhead per direct labor hour. That gives us total variable manufacturing overhead for the quarter of $101,000. Now, how much fixed overhead was there for the quarter? So remember, there's 3 months in a quarter, so it's not just 50,000, but 150,000. Because we do 50,000 times 3 there. So we have variable overhead of 101,000 estimated for the quarter and fixed overhead of 150,000 for the quarter. So the total budgeted overhead for the entire quarter would simply be the 101 plus the 150, which is 251,000. So would that mean that that's how much cash we would be paying for the entire quarter for manufacturing overhead? No, because remember, there's $20,000 of non-cash manufacturing overhead costs each month. So $20,000 each month, that's non-cash, would leave us with $60,000 for the quarter in non-cash expenses. So only $191,000 is estimated to be required in cash to pay for manufacturing overhead for the entire quarter here. So we can get that way, or we could have simply added these 3 cash disbursement amounts for each month together to find the quarterly amount. So that's how you complete the manufacturing overhead budget. Next, we will complete the ending finished goods budget.